When people hear the word avoidant, they often imagine someone who simply needs space. But human behavior is rarely that simple. In behavioral psychology, what matters most is not what someone says. What matters is the pattern beneath the words. Today, we're exploring 5 things an avoidant man may do when he's hiding another woman. This is not about accusing someone without evidence. It's about understanding behavioral patterns that often emerge when secrecy and avoidance begin working together. The first thing you'll notice is an unusual increase in privacy. Avoidant individuals naturally value independence. However, there's a difference between healthy privacy and strategic secrecy. Healthy privacy remains consistent. Strategic secrecy suddenly appears. He may start turning his phone away when texting. Notifications disappear. Passwords change. Conversations that once felt open become guarded. The key isn't the behavior itself. The key is the change. Behavioral experts always look for deviations from a person's baseline. If someone has always been private, that tells us very little. But if openness suddenly transforms into secrecy, that shift deserves attention. The second sign is emotional withdrawal. Avoidant individuals often pull back during stress, but when another romantic interest enters the picture, emotional energy has to go somewhere. You may notice that conversations feel empty. He still talks, but the depth is gone. He may appear physically present while being emotionally absent. This happens because emotional investment is a limited resource. When attention is divided, connection often weakens. Instead of sharing thoughts, fears, and future dreams, he begins offering minimal responses and superficial interactions. The relationship starts feeling like you were talking to a version of him rather than the real person. The third sign is inconsistent communication. One of the strongest indicators of hidden priorities is unpredictability. He may send affectionate messages one day and disappear emotionally the next. He may seem highly engaged for a few hours and then become unreachable for long periods. Many people mistake inconsistency for confusion. Sometimes that's true, but inconsistency can also indicate competing emotional investments. When someone is managing multiple narratives, maintaining consistency becomes difficult. Their attention shifts between different people, responsibilities, and emotional realities. As a result, communication begins to feel fragmented and unstable. The fourth sign is excessive defensiveness. This is one of the most revealing behavioral patterns. Notice what happens when you ask simple, reasonable questions. Instead of providing calm explanations, he becomes irritated. He accuses you of being insecure. He changes the subject. He redirects responsibility. Behavioral psychology teaches us that defensiveness often appears when a person feels internally threatened. The question itself isn't the problem. The possibility of exposure is the problem. People who have nothing to hide usually seek clarity. People protecting a secret often seek escape. Again, this doesn't prove wrongdoing by itself, but repeated defensiveness around specific topics should never be ignored. The fifth sign is future avoidance. An avoidant man who sees a future with you may still struggle with commitment discussions, but he won't completely abandon them. When another woman enters the picture, future conversations become uncomfortable. He avoids discussing vacations months from now. He hesitates when talking about long-term plans. Important decisions remain unresolved. Why? Because future planning requires alignment. And if his attention is divided, making commitments becomes psychologically difficult. The relationship becomes trapped in the present moment. Everything is temporary. Everything is vague. You hear phrases like, "Let's just see what happens." "Why do we need labels right now?" "Let's not overthink things." While flexibility can be healthy, chronic avoidance of future discussions often signals uncertainty about where he truly wants to invest his time and emotional energy. Now here's the most important lesson. None of these signs alone prove that another woman exists. Human behavior is complex. Stress, anxiety, work pressure, personal struggles, and attachment patterns can create similar behaviors. The mistake many people make is focusing on a single action. Professionals focus on clusters of behavior. One sign means very little. Several signs appearing together over time create a pattern, and patterns tell the real story. The goal is not to become suspicious, The goal is to become observant. Trust is built through consistency. Deception survives through confusion. When you stop chasing explanations and start observing behavior, the truth often reveals itself without confrontation. One of the earliest and most noticeable changes many people observe is a sudden increase in privacy. It's important to understand that privacy itself is not a problem. Every healthy individual deserves personal boundaries, private thoughts, and space that belongs only to them. However, behavioral psychology teaches us to pay attention not just to a behavior, but to a change in behavior. The real question is not whether someone values privacy. The question is whether their level of privacy has suddenly and dramatically increased, without a clear reason. An avoidant man who may be hiding another woman often becomes unusually protective of his phone, social media accounts, and personal space. A device that once sat casually on the table is now always face down. Messages that previously arrived without concern suddenly trigger immediate reactions. He may start carrying his phone everywhere, even into situations where he never felt the need to do so before. These actions by themselves do not prove anything, but they represent a shift that deserves attention. The psychology behind this behavior is relatively simple. When someone is managing information they do not want exposed, they naturally become more alert to anything that could reveal it. This heightened awareness often creates behaviors that appear secretive. The person may begin deleting messages more frequently, changing passwords, muting notifications, or becoming uncomfortable when others are nearby while they use their devices. What stands out is not the action itself, but the emotional intensity attached to protecting that information. You may also notice changes in how he responds to innocent questions. If you ask who he was texting, or mention that he seems distant, he may react with irritation or accuse you of invading his privacy. This reaction can be confusing, because the question itself may be completely reasonable. The defensiveness often comes from feeling that his private world is being threatened, whether or not any accusation has actually been made. Another important factor is consistency. Healthy privacy tends to remain stable over time. Secretive behavior often appears suddenly and grows stronger as time passes. The contrast between the old version of the person and the current version becomes increasingly difficult to ignore. When someone's actions consistently communicate, "Don't look too closely," it naturally raises questions. The key lesson is to focus on patterns rather than isolated incidents. One locked phone means very little. One desire for personal space means nothing unusual. But when secrecy increases across multiple areas of life at the same time, it may indicate that there is more happening beneath the surface than the person is willing to reveal. Emotional withdrawal is often one of the most painful changes to experience, because it affects the very foundation of a relationship. While physical presence may remain the same, the sense of connection begins to fade. An avoidant man, who may be hiding another woman, often doesn't create distance through obvious conflict or dramatic arguments. Instead, he gradually becomes less emotionally available, making the relationship feel different without clearly explaining why. In the beginning, conversations may have felt natural and engaging. He shared details about his day, discussed his thoughts, and showed curiosity about your feelings and experiences. Over time, however, something changes. The discussions that once felt meaningful become increasingly surface level. When you ask about his emotions, his answers become shorter. When you try to connect on a deeper level, he may redirect the conversation, or provide vague responses that reveal very little about what is actually happening inside his mind. This shift is significant because emotional connection requires attention and investment. When a person's emotional energy becomes focused elsewhere, their ability to maintain the same level of intimacy often decreases. They may still communicate regularly, but the quality of the interaction changes. You begin to notice that conversations feel more like exchanges of information than genuine moments of connection. One of the most common signs of emotional withdrawal is the feeling that you'd keigingsreist to luid. You are speaking to a different version of the person. He may still be polite, friendly, and even affectionate at times, but something important feels missing. The warmth, vulnerability, and openness that once defined the relationship seem harder to access. You may find yourself working harder to keep conversations going or searching for the closeness that used to happen naturally. Behavioral psychology suggests that people reveal their priorities through where they direct their emotional attention. When someone becomes emotionally invested in another person, maintaining the same level of emotional presence in an existing relationship can become difficult. This doesn't always happen consciously. Sometimes the individual may not even realize how distant they have become. However, the effects are often noticeable to the person experiencing the withdrawal. Another important aspect is the inconsistency that frequently accompanies emotional distancing. Some days he may appear engaged and attentive, creating hope that things are returning to normal. Then, without explanation, he becomes distant again. This unpredictability can leave you feeling confused because there is no clear event that explains the change. The most important thing to remember is that emotional withdrawal is rarely defined by a single conversation. It is a pattern that develops over time. When meaningful discussions disappear, emotional openness decreases, and genuine connection becomes increasingly difficult to find. It may indicate that something significant has shifted beneath the surface of the relationship. The absence of emotional presence often speaks louder than words ever could. Inconsistent communication is one of the most confusing behaviors a person can experience in a relationship because it creates uncertainty. Unlike complete silence, which sends a clear message, inconsistency keeps you guessing. One day, he seems fully invested, attentive, and emotionally present. The next day, he becomes distant, difficult to reach, or completely detached, without offering any explanation. This unpredictable pattern can leave you constantly questioning what changed and whether the leak in relationship is still on solid ground. An avoidant man who may be hiding another woman often struggles to maintain consistent communication because his attention is divided. Relationships require emotional energy, focus, and time. When those resources are being directed toward multiple priorities, communication naturally becomes less stable. The result is a cycle of intense engagement, followed by periods of withdrawal that seem to appear out of nowhere. At first, these changes may seem minor. He might respond quickly for several days, and then suddenly take hours, or even days to reply. He may initiate long conversations, show affection, and appear deeply interested in your life, only to become emotionally unavailable shortly afterward. What makes this behavior particularly difficult is that the positive moments create hope. Just when you begin to feel disconnected, he returns with attention and warmth, making it seem as though everything is fine again. From a behavioral perspective, consistency is often a reflection of clarity. When someone's intentions and priorities are stable, their communication tends to be stable as well. While everyone experiences busy periods and personal challenges, healthy communication usually maintains a predictable rhythm. Inconsistent communication, on the other hand, often signals internal conflict, competing priorities, or information that the person is not openly sharing. You may also notice that his explanations become increasingly vague. When asked why he disappeared or seemed distant, he may provide reasons that don't fully explain the change. Sometimes the explanations shift from one situation to another, making it difficult to understand what is actually happening. The issue is not necessarily the excuse itself, but the repeated pattern of unexplained distance, followed by sudden re-engagement. This behavior can have a powerful emotional effect, because it keeps the other person focused on regaining connection. Instead of enjoying the relationship, you may find yourself monitoring responses, analyzing messages, and searching for signs that things are returning to normal. The uncertainty becomes exhausting, because there is no stable foundation to rely on. It's important to remember that occasional inconsistency is normal in any relationship. Life circumstances, work pressures, and personal stress can temporarily affect communication. The concern arises when the pattern becomes persistent. When intense engagement repeatedly alternates with unexplained distance, it may indicate that his attention is being directed elsewhere. Over time, actions reveal priorities more clearly than promises. Consistent communication builds trust, while chronic inconsistency often creates confusion, doubt, and emotional instability that gradually weaken the connection. Defensive reactions are often among the most revealing behaviors in any relationship because they can expose what a person is trying to protect. Everyone becomes defensive occasionally. No one enjoys feeling criticized, misunderstood, or questioned. However, when simple, reasonable questions consistently trigger irritation, blame shifting, or unusually strong emotional reactions, it may indicate that something deeper is happening beneath the surface. An avoidant man, who may be hiding another woman, often reacts differently when certain topics are brought up. Instead of calmly addressing a concern or providing reassurance, he may immediately become frustrated. Well, questions that should lead to straightforward conversations suddenly turn into arguments. You might ask where he was, why he seemed distant, or why his behavior has changed. And instead of receiving a clear answer, you find yourself defending your right to ask the question in the first place. This is where many people become confused. The issue often shifts away from the original concern and becomes focused on your behavior. Instead, rather than discussing the topic at hand, he may accuse you of being controlling, insecure, suspicious, or overly sensitive. The conversation stops being about his actions and starts becoming about your reaction to those actions. This process is known in psychology as blame shifting, and it can be an effective way to redirect attention away from uncomfortable subjects. One reason defensive behavior is so significant is that it often appears disproportionate to the situation. A simple question receives a response that feels much larger than the question itself. The emotional intensity seems unexpected. This happens because the person may not be reacting only to what was said. They may also be reacting to what they fear could be discovered if the conversation continues. Behavioral experts frequently pay attention to overreactions because they can reveal areas of psychological sensitivity. People tend to become highly defensive around topics that create internal discomfort. That discomfort may come from guilt, fear of exposure, unresolved conflict, or anxiety about being confronted with the truth. You may also notice a pattern of avoiding direct answers. Instead of addressing your concern, he changes the subject, focuses on unrelated issues, or turns the conversation into a discussion about trust. While trust is important, it should not prevent honest communication. Healthy relationships allow room for questions, clarification, and open dialogue without punishment or hostility. Another common feature of defensiveness is inconsistency. On some occasions, he may answer calmly. On others, nearly identical questions trigger irritation. This unpredictability can make you hesitant to bring up concerns at all. Over time, you may start censoring yourself simply to avoid conflict, which weakens communication and creates emotional distance. The most important thing to remember is that defensiveness alone does not prove deception. People become defensive for many reasons. However, when simple questions repeatedly produce irritation, blame shifting, and avoidance, it is worth paying attention to the pattern. In healthy relationships, questions lead to understanding. In unhealthy dynamics, questions often lead to resistance. The difference between the two can reveal far more than the answers themselves. Changes in routine can be one of the most overlooked yet powerful indicators that something significant is happening beneath the surface of a relationship. Human beings are creatures of habit. Most people develop patterns in how they spend their time, communicate, and move through their daily lives. While routines naturally evolve over time, sudden and unexplained changes often attract attention because they create inconsistencies between what a person normally does and what they are doing now. An avoidant man, who may be hiding another woman, often experiences a shift in how he manages his time. New commitments begin appearing that were never mentioned before. His schedule becomes harder to predict. Activities that once followed a consistent pattern suddenly become irregular. He may start leaving earlier, coming home later, or becoming unavailable during periods when he was previously accessible. While any of these changes could have completely innocent explanations, the concern arises when the changes are frequent unexplained, and accompanied by a lack of transparency. One of the most common signs is the appearance of vague explanations. Instead of providing clear details about where he has been or what he has been doing, his answers become increasingly general. You may hear statements such as, "I was busy," "something came up," or "I had things to take care of." While these explanations are not necessarily dishonest, they often leave important questions unanswered. Over time, the lack of clarity can create confusion, because the information provided does not fully account for the changes being observed. Behavioral psychology places significant importance on patterns, because patterns reveal priorities. People consistently make time for what matters to them. When someone's routine changes dramatically, it often reflects a shift in how they are allocating their time, attention, and emotional energy. The challenge is not simply identifying the change, but understanding whether the explanations match the behavior. Another factor to consider is how the person responds when the change is noticed. In healthy relationships, routine changes are usually discussed openly. New work responsibilities, family obligations, personal projects, or unexpected challenges are typically explained because transparency helps maintain trust. However, when someone becomes uncomfortable discussing their schedule or avoids providing details, it can create a sense that part of their life is becoming inaccessible. You may also notice an increase in last-minute cancellations or sudden unavailability. Plans that were once reliable become uncertain. He may seem genuinely interested in spending time together, but frequently encounters unexpected obstacles that prevent it from happening. The issue is not necessarily the missed plans themselves, but the growing pattern of unpredictability that surrounds them. What makes routine changes particularly important is that they are often easier to observe than emotional shifts. Feelings can be hidden, but time leaves a visible trail. New habits, new schedules, and recurring absences create behavioral evidence that something has changed, even when the reason remains unclear. It's essential to avoid jumping to conclusions based on isolated incidents. Life circumstances can alter routines for perfectly legitimate reasons. However, when new schedules, mysterious commitments, unexplained absences, and reduced transparency appear together over an extended period, they may signal that an important part of the person's life is being intentionally kept out of view. In many cases, the pattern of where someone spends their time reveals more than anything they could ever say. Future avoidance is often one of the clearest signs that something has changed within a relationship, because it affects the direction of the connection itself. Healthy relationships naturally move forward through conversations about goals, expectations, and shared experiences. These discussions don't always involve marriage, major commitments, or life-changing decisions. Sometimes they are as simple as talking about next month's plans, an upcoming trip, a future celebration, or goals you hope to achieve together. When a person suddenly becomes uncomfortable with any conversation about the future, it can create uncertainty about where the relationship is heading. An avoidant man who may be hiding another woman often begins keeping the relationship firmly rooted in the present moment. Conversations that once included future possibilities gradually disappear. When you bring up plans weeks or months ahead, he may respond with vague answers or avoid the discussion altogether. Instead of expressing enthusiasm, he redirects the conversation, changes the subject, or gives responses that offer little clarity. This behavior can be confusing, because it often doesn't look like an outright rejection. He may not say that he wants the relationship to end. He may not even express dissatisfaction. Instead, he creates a situation where nothing moves forward, and nothing becomes clearly defined. The relationship remains in a state of uncertainty, making it difficult to understand his true intentions. From a behavioral psychology perspective, future planning requires commitment to a specific path. When someone is confident about their emotional investment, discussing future possibilities generally feels natural. Even if they have concerns or fears, they are usually willing to engage in conversations about where the relationship is going. However, when a person's attention is divided, or their intentions are unclear, future discussions can create discomfort. because they require decisions that may conflict with other priorities. One of the most noticeable signs of future avoidance is the increasing use of vague language. Phrases such as, "Let's see what happens," "We'll figure it out later," or "Why can't we just enjoy the moment?" begin appearing more frequently. While these statements may sound reasonable on the surface, they can become problematic when they are consistently used to avoid every meaningful discussion about the future. You may also notice that long-term plans remain unresolved. Important conversations are repeatedly postponed. Decisions that would normally strengthen the relationship are left hanging without clear answers. Even simple commitments become difficult to secure because he seems reluctant to lock himself into anything beyond the immediate present. Another important aspect of future avoidance is its emotional impact. Over time, you may begin feeling as though you're investing in a relationship that has no clear direction. The uncertainty can create anxiety because there is no roadmap, no shared vision, and no sense of progression. You may find yourself constantly waiting for clarity that never arrives. It's important to remember that some avoidant individuals genuinely struggle with commitment-related discussions due to fear, past experiences, or attachment patterns. Future avoidance alone does not prove that another woman is involved. However, when this behavior appears alongside secrecy, emotional withdrawal, inconsistent communication, defensiveness, and unexplained changes in routine, it becomes part of a larger pattern. Ultimately, relationships thrive when two people are willing to move forward together. When someone consistently refuses to discuss the future, avoids making plans, and keeps the relationship trapped in the present, it often raises an important question. Is the uncertainty a result of fear, or is it a result of keeping other options open? The answer is rarely found in words alone. It is revealed through repeated patterns of behavior over time.